If you enjoy this content, please take a moment to rate and review it. Your feedback will greatly impact our ability to reach more people. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone to Health Further. I have another good guest today, Mark Durante. Mark, thanks for jumping on. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that, Vic. I've been pretty excited so far to get on here, so I appreciate the invite.
Good. So we're going to talk about really a new, almost cutting edge at the sort of forefront of medical technology and treatment. Talk about your company, RiseUP, and how you're helping patients.
Yeah, well, I would say RiseUP is a passion/legacy project for me that was born out of my own health issue. But basically what happened is through the use of biologics, I had a reversal in some of my own health issues. So what I wanted to really do with RiseUP was to create I would say, a vast portfolio of biologics that gave practitioners the opportunity to use combination therapies to basically help in wellness, longevity, aesthetics, and traditional medicine, to basically reverse a lot of the things that people are dealing with, whether it's knee pain, whether it's neurological related issues, whether it's hair restoration, sexual health, you name it. There's so many areas that this biologic space can go to. But then the other part of it was I wanted to try and develop a company so that we could scale it to help bring the cost down so that more and more people could get involved. Okay, and that's been the ultimate goal.
I think people think about biologic, as you mentioned, in hair loss or sexual health, maybe. But where I got interested is it's now expanding into other parts of medicine, like neuropathy damage and pain related to that, or orthopedics. Maybe let's talk about some of the tools. There's PRP and
correct.
A lot of people will know PRP and stem cells, but what is PRF, which is sort of a next step of PRP?
It is, and PRF is really the next step. Basically, what we're doing is we're taking the PRP, but then we're taking it through another process where we're basically introducing thrombosis back into the body. And basically what thrombosis is doing is kind of rebuilding the scaffolding in the body. That's when you're going to clot, that scaffolding is what's being created so that those platelets that you're getting out of the PRP are adhering to something, hanging out and starting the rebuild process. And of course, then things just start to evolve where we start getting into exosomes, where we see limitations in PRP or PRF. Then we start getting to exosomes, which are the way all cells in the body communicate. And then we get into more acellular type of products, that's a more extensive. That's kind of like think of a water balloon in which you pop the outer membrane of the balloon and you collect all the water contents. It kind of starts to carry all of the cell structures of the stem cell, but it doesn't carry the DNA and it doesn't carry the cell membrane. And then you get into the stem cell side of things, which is a living, active structure that can morph into a multitude of tissue types.
Okay, so maybe describe how RiseUP interacts with patients and with physicians. I think you're not a physician, and so you're in this advisory role, but often there are physicians involved. How does RiseUP work in between the patient and physicians?
So, and that's really the key. Where RiseUP really does is they sit between the lab and the practitioner. So a lot of times the physicians are meeting a lot of different elements that they're struggling with through the pharmaceutical side, through surgical side. Maybe they see that there's an opportunity where they want to take like a first line defense. They'll come to us because we're innovating different biologic products in our labs, bringing them to them so that they can determine what would be the best use. And of course, I'm not a doctor. I oftentimes joke that I am an MD, but that's only through initials only. But I think around this, I got very engrossed because I'm working with the researchers to start developing the next generation of products that practitioners are going to utilize in order to solve later medical issues. I have to expressly say, I can't talk about any cures, of disease and things of that and make any type of claims. But the reality is the research is being done out there. You can find even last year, there were over 25,000 studies that were done in the biologic space that are continuing to prove the future of this in modern medicine. And I think we're starting to see some advances because I just read recently that the FDA is going to permit about 20 new cell structure products through the FDA on an annual basis, and that will continue to grow as time goes on. So part of what we're also trying to do is become a part of that revolution. We want to have our cell structures up there at the same time receiving acceptance. But right now, a lot of them are sitting kind of on the cusp. They're going through different studies. Practitioners are looking at these products. They're trying to understand the pathways in which they're helping to heal the body, and then they're implementing where it's necessary. And a lot of people are being able to avoid different pharmaceuticals, different surgeries. And I think that's where we're ultimately going. And I have to preface this. This is not a conversation against pharmaceuticals, nor is it a conversation against surgery, because they all play an applicable role. But I think what's happening is with the new biologics or regenerative medicine space coming out there, we're not going to have to race to those, because once you start getting on medications, then you're dealing with side effects. Once you start dealing with surgery, there are some things where once the body has changed form, we're not perfect. We don't get to put Humpty Dumpty back together again so easily. And so then you can start to have other structural issues that might show up. So I think this becomes, again, you'll hear me say this a lot, is the first line of defense towards helping the body heal itself.
Yeah. So
one of the,
I
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just saying, I'm really interested in sort of an all of the above menu of options for physicians,
Yes.
where they have
Yep.
different patients with, of course, different conditions, maybe different life situations, different symptoms.
Correct.
And so giving them more optionality, more choices is certainly, I think, a net positive, especially when you inform them. As we were talking before, as we were prepping for this, I kind of said, Mark, this sounds really good, but in God we trust, but everyone else has to bring data, right? So you were kind enough to submit multiple journal reports. I wanted to focus on 3, really around neuropathy and nerve pain, particularly focused around diabetic neuropathy, or also neuropathy caused by chemotherapy, which I think presents in a somewhat similar way.
It does.
And so we will attach these in the show notes. We'll have links to these, peer-reviewed studies. They all were published in 2024, so they're pretty recent.
Yes.
I wanted to put us down that road to have you get the chance to talk through what the research is saying coming out now, how these treatments sort of add to the repertoire of what physicians might choose. Of course, you're not a doc, I'm not either, but giving them more optionality, and let's talk about these studies and how they fit in neuropathy and nerve pain.
Yeah, well, and this is a personal story. I mean, we'll get into that later on, but the reality is neuropathy nearly disabled me. So it was my invitation with an orthopedic surgeon who was doing this sort of stuff that started to say, hey, we have solutions. And so as we're going through this, neuropathy happens in all kinds of different fashions. Like you said, you can have something that could be around diabetes. You could have something like me where, my body's dying. And so there's a retraction of blood flow and the nerves are starting to die. You could have it related to chemotherapy. There's a lot of reasons why we get neural death, right? And so in doing this, I think that was a nice variety of studies just to kind of talk about a variety of different ways, because there's a lot of research right now dealing in Parkinson's and dealing in MS and these are all neurological type conditions, but there's a peripheral component to them. So they can present as neuropathy or nerve dysfunction in the body at the same time. So a lot of it, the responsibility to the practitioner is just really trying to find out where's the root cause and then attacking it. Because we know, honestly, in a lot of these neuropathy type conditions, we're dealing with the nerves dying because they're not getting access to blood flow. There's not getting proper oxygenation. So now you start getting what we call oxidative stress, a lot of free radical development that's not there. It's a cascade of things that, when they go wrong, the whole system starts to break down and it goes wrong.
So
then we're having.
Let's talk about this article in Molecular Neurobiology, and I'm going to butcher the name, but the role of mesenchymal stem cell derived exosome. Yeah. So what is that for the person that's maybe less educated like me?
Yes.
And then how does it help diabetic or chemotherapy induced peripheral neuropathy?
Absolutely. Okay. So, mesenchymal stem cells are traditionally found in umbilical cord tissue, in placental tissue, in bone marrow, in fat cells. But mesenchymal stem cells, as their pure nature, are more of a regenerative cell. It has the ability to morph into other tissue types. There is a hierarchy of those type of cell structures. And so particularly for us, we like to use things that are more in the Wharton's jelly or umbilical cord tissue because it has the most biologically active ingredients of all the tissue types. Now, I know a lot of practitioners, based on wherever they feel comfortable in their use, could be involved in bone marrow fat, could be involved in a variety of different things. And there's nothing wrong with those. They're all going to play a key point, and they all carry certain, specific elements that are going to play a key role, right? So as we're walking down this, that mesenchymal stem cell also produces what we call an exosome. An exosome is how those stem cells are delivering biological ingredients amongst each other in order to help with cellular repair, cellular renewal, cellular division. So what we like to do in these sort of cases is that where we're not using a whole cell living stem
Yeah,
cell,
I think the that innovation of not using the complete stem cell
correct.
reduces some downside risk as well.
It does, because you don't have immunoreaction to it. So a lot of times, what a lot of people don't realize is the outer membrane that carries the lock and the key, right? So I always tell everybody when I'm talking about this, if you've got a stem cell and there's a lock on that cell membrane and something tries to come up and unlock it and it's the wrong key, your immune system is going to step up and attack it. And that can often present people with a lot of different issues. So when we remove that cell membrane or we use components that are within the stem cell, they don't have that lock and key feature. So there's not the immune reaction. And so that's one of the reasons why we like to use it. Plus, there's no DNA transfer. So a lot of people are always worried about, hey, will I pick up somebody else's DNA? And the answer is, in these acellular components, the nucleus and the cell membrane are removed, or they don't play a part. But they are carrying very specific factors, in terms of rejuvenation and healing. And in the purpose of neuropathy, like we talked about before, there's a neurogenesis or a nerve renewal process. There is an angiogenesis or a vascular improvement. There is inflammation modulation so that you can create an environment so that the body can work more functionally. Then you get oxidative stress. Again, all these things are kind of a cascade. And then you're getting...
So let me try to rephrase to see if I'm even following you. So
sure.
Diabetic patient, maybe it's an endocrinologist, someone trying to help that patient, and they're working to treat the diabetes and the glucose levels in the blood and their disease, but as a side effect, they get this peripheral neuropathy.
Correct.
And this treatment, I think, would be delivering right to the source. And I want to talk about how you would deliver it, but deliver to the feet or hands.
Correct.
The raw material, or I don't know how you would phrase it, the raw materials that the blood would often deliver that is not being delivered in this patient. And then that can be either a temporary or a long-term solution. They may be on recovery and it could be temporary. It could be a longer-term solution. So talk about how you would think about partnering with a doctor about thinking about this.
Yeah, so I think when they're looking at it, we just can take diabetic neuropathy, there is a breakdown of the vascular system, and the vascular system is running up to the nerves and continuously creating a repair nature. They kind of run parallel with one another. When the nerves start to break down, you start getting this missignaling that takes place. So, and then that's where we start getting this cascade of other things. Now, all of a sudden, the environment starts to get inflamed, and then then other key areas that would have other key ingredients that would have come in and started to create the repair process suddenly don't have a pathway to do so. So I think when we're getting involved in this, we're really trying to say, number one is working with the practitioner is how do we strengthen the vascular system? How do we create new vascular growth so that it can continue to nourish the nerves? Now that the nerves start to become more protective, now all of a sudden things start to function properly. Now the inflammation starts to reduce and the body can start to repair itself in its kind of natural fashion. Yeah. And, I think it's interesting, and that was across all of them. So when we talked about some of the ways that this is utilized, in the studies, they were used in a variety of different ways. Some of them were actually injected at the nerve pathways that were affected, kind of like think of it as the root system, and then it would kind of just spread out to all the different nerves that were affected. There were others that felt like this was more of a total body issue, and so they were administered through an IV therapy. And then there was another study where it was just applied topically, to the area of injury. And all of them showed very significant results. And there's some interesting things when it comes to the change in pain scores and nerve regeneration and all that were affected here because, and I don't know if you want me to talk about that at this particular point.
So I think the takeaway for me was there were without, in an hour's worth of reading, and you provided me with more than that. I could have read for several hours. There were three studies done in the last year around neuropathy or peripheral neuropathy treatments. And you're right.
Oh yeah.
All three were different applications. And I wanted you to talk
Yes.
about the Wharton's jelly application because that was a topical application. Um,
Correct. Correct.
and I want you also to explain what Wharton's jelly is because I had not heard that term before this.
Yeah, so Wharton's jelly is kind of the jelly-like substance around the vessels in the umbilical cord. And in there is all those mesenchymal stem cells that we were talking about. So it's just a very rich source. You have to realize that these were supplying life when the baby was inside the womb. So there is, and in most cases, people didn't realize this, but for years, all that was just being thrown away as trash. Then all of a sudden, people started storing their own umbilical cords or cord blood, realizing that, hey, down the road, they could play a regenerative, source in my own
Yeah.
body. And then later you get labs like ours where we started to process those, stem cells down to a period of going, hey, look, it has not specified yet. So it hasn't turned into that identifying bone structure or skin structure. So it still has opportunity to do so much good, even outside oneself. So then we
Yeah,
started
and
processing
is
these
there
products.
enough of a donor community where for the patient demand, there's enough of this material?
There is. I mean, at this point, we're very rich in the source. Now, I will say all those sources, and I think this is a very important part as we go down this pathway, is that not all Wharton's jelly is created equal. There's a lot of contributing factors that make one better than the other. And but at the end of the day, once you pick that right source and then you process it, it can play a very significant role in somebody's outcome. And I think
Yeah.
that's where the physician comes in and says, what does the patient need? And then at that point starts lining up with the right cell structure.
Yeah. And would you say RiseUP is sort of analogous to a compound pharmacy or like a supply chain partner with the pharmacist, with the physician? Is that kind of how
Yeah,
you play in the room?
I would probably play. It's kind of because it's really unique how we're positioned, but we're literally kind of like direct to lab, but we're not the lab. So we're kind of like their partner in bringing these products to them so that they can start playing around with them in their practice and demonstrating. Now, we're also involved in doing different studies. I mean, we had a 5,000 patient study that we were doing under the direction of a transplant cardiologist at Cedars-Sinai. In that study, we were looking at all kinds of things from cardiovascular to autoimmune disease to neurological issues, orthopedic, lung related issues, aesthetics,
Yeah.
urology. So it gets very expansive where that same cell structure is playing a role in each of them. And
Yeah.
so at that point, now we're trying to say, what else can we do with that cell structure? What is in there that can maybe be something that's more specific towards nerves, another one that's more specific towards bone, and what role do they play, and how do we put that together so that it produces the best outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah. It's super exciting. Part of the reason I wanted to focus on neuropathy is I think this technology often is sort of bucketed in the longevity space or in the
Right. Right.
aesthetic space, and it is
Yes.
that certainly. But there's a lot more there's evidence behind really effective treatments. And
Correct.
so, what is the best way for physicians to get up the learning curve and sort of get engaged in this?
Yeah, so I think there's one is that there's always a communication with us where we can give them more direction based on what they're specifically interested in. So RiseUP Medical has its own website,
Yeah.
like www.riseupmedical.com. But I think really, if you want to, start taking your case studies and going on PubMed, go on Nature, go on to cell.com. These
Yeah.
are all, published, journals
Yeah.
that are
Yeah,
bringing
and
this evidence
we'll have
forward.
links to your site as well as these three papers, and they're serious. Being Molecular Neurobiology, American Journal of Biomedical Science. I mean,
Mhm.
these are
Yes,
big journals out there.
they are.
Um,
They are.
okay, let's shift to your personal story because it's a really incredible story. So, how did you come to
Yeah.
this space? Yes, you're an MD, but you're not a doctor. How did you get involved
Correct.
and start thinking about this? You had you had a heart condition, so maybe let's start
I did.
there
I did.
and
I
then talk
did.
about
And
how that evolved to today.
which is very interesting because the heart condition, I only discovered it because I was getting neuropathy that nobody could explain. Originally, we were thinking it was diabetic. Maybe it was a genetic mutation. Like I was going around and doing all these tests, and then all of a sudden, one day, they go, "We hear an irregular heartbeat." And so, just to get a baseline, they were thinking maybe there's nothing wrong with it, but maybe there is. When I go there, they suddenly tell me, "Well, your heart is operating at 50% function." So I went through about 3 years before my heart took a major dump, and I literally walked in with a 5% ejection fraction. And that is basically kind of the output of blood to the body.
Right.
It is
5% is not functional, not
no,
really that very good.
no. The doctor even asked me how I was talking to him, or I even walked into the hospital. He was shocked that I was able to just stand up on my own. But what was interesting, I went through about a 10-month journey to get a heart transplant after I had already been through multiple surgeries.
You had two LVAD procedures.
I did. That's right.
Which is one more than I thought you would really want to do.
Correct.
But you made it through that process, and you were able to get a new heart. So you have a transplanted donor heart right now, right?
I do.
And so that was successful, and your heart condition, although you're going to be rehabbing from it probably for your whole life, it is strong now, and yet
very strong.
The neuropathy symptoms persisted.
They did. They actually got worse. And again, when we talk about blood flow to the area, they thought after the heart transplant that now I'm getting proper blood flow to the feet, that it would naturally repair and restore the nerves. And instead, it got worse. I was on so much medication. Literally, I tell people, after going through every drug trial, spinal stimulators, everything, I literally nearly became disabled because I lost the full feeling in my feet and halfway up my legs. I was getting muscle atrophy where it was retracting. And that was where, in a desperate conversation, I was sitting down with an orthopedic surgeon who had been doing stem cell research. And he said, hey, look, I can use your bone marrow. We can mix this up with some, acellular type products, reintroduce that back into your body, and it should start to create a repair process. And it got me about halfway, but I was spending exponential greater money to try and keep that result just level or plateaued. And that's when I started going on an additional search where I found another cell structure, an acellular structure that I took and literally got me off all my medication to the point where I've restored most feeling. And I'm going to say this because I always want people to understand this. It doesn't necessarily say that that's going to be a cure. Could I, if I focus enough? Maybe I could, maybe I won't. But I don't need to take medication anymore. It doesn't actually cause me any issues in terms of the type of lifestyle that I lead. I have zero limitations whatsoever. And that to me was a success story. Now, at this point, I'm running around my body trying to fix everything else. But at the end of the day, now I'm doing some focused injections at these different nerve pathways in order to try and see what type of results we get as we continue to play in the neuropathic space.
So let me back up for a minute. So you were talking to an orthopedic surgeon in I'm going to say frustration or looking for an answer with lack of feeling, neuropathy, not only pain, but there's a numbness. You lose feeling, which is it's kind of dangerous driving, walking around. It's you don't realize until you have it. But it can be kind of dangerous.
That was the scary part because honestly, it would take me 3 to 4 days to recover after exercise. I was starting to miss the foot pedal when I was pushing on the brake and the gas pedal. It was getting scary. But the other part too is the medication. I was on such high dosages that people didn't know how I functioned as a human being. And me already being in the medical space, I was concerned I wasn't going to be able to soon have a conversation with people. I think you and I talked about it before. Like if you had me walk between two people, I was assured to fall into one of them because I could not keep a balance between two objects.
And so almost out of desperation or frustration, you tried the stem cell therapy and it had some positive effect. And that then inspired you to go further and almost
correct.
Maybe not experimenting yourself, but keep looking, keep researching, keep working.
Correct. And it was that one product that actually led us to so many other products in the areas we're trying to explore, both for economics, for results, because that's where everybody starts talking about, well, outside of stem cells, exosomes are a great choice. Well, exosomes are good, but I find them more effective for acute conditions, not so much chronic. So that's why we're bringing this evidence back to the practitioner so that they can understand. Because I give you one example is that you would have to use 3 to 5 times the exosome count to try and produce what we could do in a single cc with an acellular product that's more robustly developed. So that's what we're trying to bring forth and saying, where do you use these? When do you use these? Economics doesn't always play a part, even though that's what we're trying to drive for.
Okay, so you are, what's the right way to say it? Creating or developing new versions, correct, new iterations of the combination of different
that is
exosomes,
correct,
stem cell, extracellular tools.
That's it. That's it. I mean, so much so that, I mean, we're getting into new lab developments, new projects. It's a very exciting time in this space. And we're trying to bring forth products that not only just play a general role, but play a very specialized role. And so we're bringing things to the market that people haven't even heard of yet, that are just giving the practitioner an opportunity to just take it one step further. And those that really step into the regenerative medicine field are seeing some really great results. And ultimately, this is all playing into longevity, right? Because people, if you ask somebody today, do they want to live to be 125? Based on how they feel, they're going to tell you there's no chance in hell, right? It is. But if you could say you could be fully functional to 125, now would you like to live that age? You get a totally different answer. So the reality is we look at longevity as functionally active to the point of death.
Yeah, and I like that. And I also wanted to start off this conversation not in the regenerative medicine longevity, because I think
Correct.
a lot of the industry today, a lot of the money, a lot of the interest, or the patients have neurological pain, or have a heart condition, or have a knee that is painful, but they're too young to get a knee replacement. And all of those examples, we're beginning to have treatments that are not necessarily designed to help me live to 120. They're designed to sort of help me for the next 6 months have less pain, or have a better experience in that. Now, that might also inspire me to do more and live longer, but it can be a much more, it still is chronic, but a much more direct near-term solution.
Correct. And, I like to talk about this program, this industry more as a supplement program. Like, I think God put the roadmap in the body, right? The key is that it lacks the raw materials in order to do the repair. So if you don't have the full raw materials, that's why we start to see this general decay in life. And ultimately, people start saying, I can almost point to when you're going to die, even though there's no magician or crystal ball. The reality is that you start producing less and less, and the body becomes more dysfunctional. That starts leading to other disease types. And we talk about the fact that inflammation equals disease. So when the cells start going wrong and inflammation starts to highly develop, that's where we start to see the presence of disease. So how do we stop that? How do we keep the inflammation low so that those things don't ever start? And prevention really is the key. You and I talked about that. But, at the end of the day, we're kind of late to the game, right? So we're kind of looking back and going, hey, our 20 and 30-year-olds, they're in the best spot right now while they're still active and they can do the preventative method. But, me in my 50s.
Me at 50, me at 54, I have, I have some wear and tear on the body. I've been
correct.
Reasonably healthy, but also I'm at 50 plus, you have some kinks and some things going on.
Oh yeah. I'm just trying to throw paint on it right now to make it look good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what are, besides aesthetics, and sort of the holistic longevity practices, what are the leading specialties that are really, is orthopedics, is that the leading one? Or what are, maybe you mentioned a cardiologist
orthopedics
study.
and pain management. Yep, it is.
Yeah.
I think cardiology, I'm going to say this. What's interesting is, though they may not have been doing it, you'd be surprised at how many cardiologists are open to it and are even suggesting for them, or not, I wouldn't say suggesting, they're not against them going and doing these sort of stem cell therapies. For me, I'm a heart transplant patient. I tell my doctor all the time, and they look at me and they go, well, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. They don't ever fight me on it. They're like, you're in good shape. Keep it going. You become that case study of, hey, this is what life looks like after transplant, where they're riddled with death most of the time. So it's a blessing to be like this. And honestly, it's a blessing. Out of pain came opportunity, and so that's.
Yeah, excellent. So talk to me just for a minute about the risks or the questions that a patient or a physician should ask. I mean, if they go to your website, you would walk them through it. But let's say they're doing their own research. What should they be watching out for or really digging into so they don't have a risk factor that they could prevent?
Yeah, I think of a lot of it is going to be manufacturing practices. I think, some sort of clinical research that's kind of backing things, digging down into trying to understand how it's built. The thing is too that, a stem cell is like a log, but you can break that thing up into mulch. You can turn it into a toy. You can turn it into, a doorway, right? So, and when labs get involved, a lot of them don't try to capture everything in that cell structure. Even if they're using it in acellular, They're just looking for a part of it. So
Yeah,
a lot
and
of
they may
times
be
too,
they may be not intentional. They just don't know any different. So
that's
they're
correct.
yeah,
That
yeah,
that's correct. And two, I think when you're looking into the published studies, you kind of start looking at the common themes that are happening within these studies because they're using some of the richest material available to them. And so, then sometimes this thing turns into a for-profit model and suddenly everybody starts kind of skinnying down on things. You really want a very results-driven company that's driving the initiative. That's why a lot of times too, I'm not afraid to tell somebody going, hey, I'm not going to be your least expensive option, but I am going to be the one that drives the result. And
yeah.
so
I
if
mean,
you
with
need
my
to,
health, I don't know if I want my health to be the bargain basement shopper
no,
version.
no, no,
Yeah,
no. And trust me, and I will say this, even myself in the industry played around with trying to see if I could get some of these lower level products in order to work for my benefit. And I had to suffer in the process. And eventually, but that taught me what I was able to share with physicians of where these really fall into place because to do our very robust product in an aesthetic application is unnecessary. It would cost you
yeah.
more money and doesn't produce any better result than
Yeah,
using
so
the
if you're gonna you want to tighten up the skin or
correct.
hair regrowth and things like that, there
That's
are
it.
less expensive options. And then when you're
Correct.
trying
And
to attack neuropathy or something
that's right.
in a joint pain, it might be different.
The biggest thing too that I like to say to practitioners as well is you have to talk about dosing. If you look at these studies, the challenge I run into in this field is everybody's worried about what the patient will pay for. And so they have a tendency to underdose the patient. I've started kind of sharing with practitioners to start using a good, better, best concept and let the patient decide what they want. Because more times than less, they're opting for more of the Rolls Royce option because they don't want to keep coming in multiple times.
Yeah.
They're in serious pain. They want to get that done. So, in this thing here, and that requires a certain dosing level. And that's up for the practitioner to decide. But that is the biggest mistake that I find in this industry
Yeah.
is underdosing and hoping for the best.
Okay, then let's talk for a minute about regulation. So
Yeah.
you and I were prepping for this and you were very
Mhm.
careful about I can talk about these things, I can't talk about this. Where is
Correct.
this set of compounds regulated in the US? What is
Yes.
your role in the process? What's the physician's role? What's the patient's role?
Yes.
How does the FDA play? How's it regulated today?
Yeah, no. As a matter of fact, I mean, there is some tissue codes, biologic codes. They're called 361, 351. Products can fit within those categories to determine whether or not they're injectable, whether or not they're in, they can make some form of a claim. And then most of the others are regulated under more of a cosmetic act, more topical. So when you're playing in this space, there's a lot of these, when you're talking about allogeneic, meaning coming from someone else rather than coming from self, the rules change, right? And so if you were doing something like PRP or you were doing your bone marrow or your fat, you're going to fall into a different type of range than if you're
Yeah,
using something from umbilical
that's
cord
your
placental.
own so just to be
Correct.
clear, in that case, the physician is or whoever is drawing blood, kind of spinning it down and then
Correct.
putting it back in it, maybe on my head because I'm bald, or so
Correct. Correct.
somewhere. Yeah,
That's right. But I think the thing that we're trying to tell people is that are you impressed where you're at? Because at the end of the day, the cell structures and what we're pulling from your body has been affected the same way you have.
yeah.
So that's why a
Right. So
lot
I
of
want to
people are
talk about
migrating to
what's the
yeah,
regulation around the allogeneic, which is there's a
yeah,
better supply, or I think you could have better
correct.
products
It is.
from
It
other
is.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, we call them day zero, right? It is because there's been no influence to them. They're at their highest potency that they ever will be.
Yeah.
And so in that realm, a lot of them are trying to go through the FDA approval process. And that is where most of it is right now. Taking these exosomes and acellular stem cells, they're going through a process, but it's going to be 3 to 5 years. So a lot of times, practitioners are making. That's one of the reasons why I say I can't say anything. I can't relate a product to any type of disease state because
Yeah.
now that's making a claim and I don't have the foundation for it.
But a
But if I
physician, maybe in an academic medical setting, could be under an IRB doing research
correct, that's
and
exactly
have
right.
patients that
That's
they
correct.
are doing research in partnership
Correct.
with, but they still
Correct.
are providing a treatment, and there's disclosures
Correct.
and all kinds of things. But is that a common pathway, or how are
It
physicians
is.
approaching it?
No, and it is because the thing a lot of people don't realize is the FDA is out for consumer protection, right? So they're out to watch how you're marketing, what you're saying, and make sure there's a safety profile, both at the distribution lab level and even at the physician level. But once you're inside the medical practice, medical doctors realize they have the freedom to make choices based on how they see fit. The key at that point is that's where their medical board gets involved, because what the medical board wants to see in a lot of these is, have they been consented? Have they been given a variety of other options that they can explore? Getting all the medical history side so that when you go forth with that option, it's clearly determined that that is the option. And that's really how these regulations are played. They're coming from two different places, both from the FDA and from their medical boards to make the determination. And so I think if you play in that safe space, remain very educational, present the options, explore everything with the patients, become well informed as a practitioner so that you can have that proper conversation. That's where I find a lot of the practitioners are going, this is where regenerative medicine is going to play a key role going forward.
Yeah. Okay.
And all we want to
And
do
then,
is try and help supply if when that's the choice they want to make.
yeah. So talk about that. So as you start working with a physician group, maybe it's a practice of 10 physicians, 15 physicians,
Mhm.
they begin to understand the products that you offer. They make
Correct.
their own determination of when it is useful for the patient, and they get the patient to
Mhm.
consent as needed.
Correct.
So we get through all that process, and now they are using one of your products for some purpose.
Mhm.
Is it then you have like a production facility, and then you're producing for them? Is it
That's right.
job by job? How's it formulated, or how's it done?
No. So we have a lab that's producing in larger quantities based on specific, types. Like, is it the mesenchymal stem cell? Is it the mesenchymal stem cell exosome? Is
Okay.
it more of a papilla, a dermal papilla exosome, which is more for hair? Is there an exosome that's designed more for face and skin? So as we're doing this, we really are trying to learn from the physician the things that they need, but then also applying the science back to it, because inside our labs we have researchers. They're continuously researching these biologics and trying to create solutions for tomorrow. And so at that point we just try to get them connected directly to the labs in order to order the product to use from the patients.
Yeah.
But I
Okay.
spend a lot of my time dealing more on the education side than anything else.
Right. Okay. And
Yeah.
then look forward for a minute, like in the next 5 years, the next 10 years. I
Yeah.
mean, you don't have a working crystal ball, but you're in the space more than I am. Where's
Yeah.
the trajectory now, and where are we headed? What's exciting that you're seeing out there? And then what do we need to figure out and solve for?
Yeah, no, as a matter of fact, I mean, I can just see what we've done in the last 2 years compared to the 2 years before that. And it has launched exponentially. The
Okay, so
greatest
describe. So
innovation.
maybe let's start there. Like, where were we
Yeah.
2 years ago, and what
Yeah.
has changed over the last 2 years?
I think that everybody has been looking at using more of a generalized cell type in order to kind of, solve the issue. But now we're starting to kind of narrow down and find very specific elements, like what key ingredients or proteins should be present in an exosome if you're looking at it for a joint, what you're looking at it for cardiac, what you're looking at it for neurological. So each
Yeah, so it's
disease.
instead of using one for
Correct.
all cases, you start having
Correct.
specialized products. Like for
That's
nerve
correct.
pain, you should
That's
use this, and for a
that's correct.
cardiac or an orthopedic application, you would use something different, which has maybe
That
the matrix and the proteins that are added in are different.
Correct. And so I think we've gone from a generalized to a more specific type of format. And I think the other part too is that when you start bringing in the AI side into healthcare, you're going to see another level of innovation that's going to take place. It's going to make these even better, because as we start to understand more of how the body is utilizing these products, what pathways are playing a key role in terms of the healing process, then they start to build that direction. So even though I don't have the crystal ball, I see a lot of that. I mean, we're seeing
Yeah.
things where they're taking cancer cells and turning them back into muscle tissue. You're sitting down there going, I never thought I
Yeah.
could do anything with a cancer cell, but there's very unique elements that are happening. So this gets real. I think we're even going to be able to go back to ourselves as the key source at some point.
Yeah.
So innovation will change continuously. I think we're playing in a space because this is where we're at.
Yeah. And have you seen the scientific research and publications also growing exponentially? Because as people are sort
Oh,
of experimenting with these new
yes.
I don't know, new composite materials, they then want to research it, and then someone will
They
follow
do.
that and sort of build on that.
They do. Look, the year before last year, there was 22,000 studies that were brought forward. The year before that, I want to say there was somewhere in like 17, 18,000 studies. So you see this exponential growth.
Yeah.
So it's showing, and as a matter of fact, the growth in the worldwide market of these therapies is at 30% per year. That is unheard of in an industry, and that's already
That's
a billion-dollar
CAGR.
industry. So
Yeah.
to grow 30% in a billion-dollar marketplace, that's pretty significant. So
Well, that's
I
what
think the
really
writing's on the
impressed.
wall.
That's what really impressed me. That I had this just out of my own ignorance categorized as aesthetics or aesthetic cosmetics, and
Correct.
it's grown much broader than that.
Correct.
And so I think that is probably because I haven't paid attention in the last couple of years. And so part of the reason I wanted to do this show is to shine light on it and sort of help physicians maybe understand, give people a handoff again, just where your website is, and then maybe are there other
Yes.
podcasts or other things that you listen to or that you'd recommend if they want to dig in more about this?
You know,
I should have prepped you with that question. I didn't.
No. As a matter of fact, I appreciate that. It's not so much the podcast as much as I like to dig into the research.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm doing a lot of digging into the research. I'm using AI in order to kind of simplify it and bring it. And as a matter of fact, I would even encourage other people to do that. I mean, here's the thing. You just have to make sure you're prompting these things properly. But the reality is you start to find a common theme. And so in that common theme, you can learn quite a bit. But I do love the podcast side, but I'm more stuck into the research because that's what the physicians want.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course they can always find our stuff through RiseUpMedical.com. And so, absolutely.
Well, Mark, incredible story. I love that you took your personal experience, which, certainly was challenging, but you emerged from it. And now you are bringing those lessons learned through, through hard challenges on yourself to the public, which is incredible and really, really kind and valuable.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I was 18 years in the medical field and didn't even know about this. And that's why it turned into a passion project, because after stopping my suffering, I didn't want to see anybody else suffer like that.
Right,
I mean, it's so that's where this has come about. Now it's turning into a legacy project because I see how innovative this is. And I probably won't be alive long enough in order to see what it truly turns into. But if I can play a part in the beginning, that's what's important to me.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks for doing this. We'll have some physicians looking into the research. Hopefully we'll get these treatments broader out there. It'll be fun.
That would be awesome. I'm always here to help. So Vic, thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for doing it. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.